Now, ever since I announced that we were going to be having a sermon series on thirst in September, people have been coming to me to tell me different stories of times when they have been really thirsty and something unusual happened. So the story I wanted to share with you at first actually came from David Ruffin, who told me one time when he was a little younger, although it's hard to believe because he's pretty young as it is, but he was traveling in Russia, and he had to catch a train to the Ukraine, and so he's running, and he's late, and he thinks he's going to miss the train. He can't read anything, so he's just kind of bouncing around trying to find this train. He's got all his bags, he finally hops on, finds the train, finds his room, he's exhausted, he's sweating, and he sits down, and he realizes he doesn't have any water with him. And the gentleman who's across from him in the train car, fortunately, is a kind older gentleman who could see this young American in distress, and so he reached into his bag and he pulled out a big bottle, like a 1 liter bottle of one of those clear bottles, Evian bottles of water that they have over in Europe, and he just looks at me, opens the top, and he hands it to Dave, and Dave just takes this bottle and he's just like, and he's chugging this thing. And he's about 3 gulps in when he starts noticing his throat is just burning. And his Russian host is laughing his head off because it was a bottle of homemade vodka. And I understand Dave put quite a dent in that bottle. Needless to say, it was an interesting ride to the Ukraine. I appreciate that. But it reminds us to be careful when we're really thirsty, to make sure that which we are taking to quench our thirst is really refreshing and healthy for us. Right? Thirst represents a longing. It's like an itch that wants to be scratched. It's like sexual desire that wants to be fulfilled. It's when we have this thirst, when we have an itch, when we have a desire, it creates a kind of a tension and prompts us to do something. Most of us thirst to be loved, to be appreciated, to be needed, to be cared for. We thirst for community, a real community where we can play a role and where we can truly belong. We thirst for meaning. We thirst for purpose in our lives. But sometimes we mistake what we're thirsting for something else, and then we try to meet it in ways that actually take us off course. So, for example, some people who are seeking inner peace and a sense of calm in their lives try to find that and mistake that for numbness, and so they look for it in alcohol or in drugs or other things that will give a false sense of peace. Some people yearn for love but mistakenly try to quench it with sex and sexual experiences or fame or other things, but what they're really yearning for is to be loved and to share their love with someone else. Our conception of what it is that we're thirsty for is really important as we figure out how to quench our thirst. If you're dying of thirst in the desert, you need to be able to distinguish between a vision that is a mirage and is an illusion of water, or a real oasis that can save your life. So my topic today is thirst for community. And just like a person in a lifeboat out in the middle of the ocean can be surrounded by water but have nothing to drink, we can be surrounded by people and yet not have community, real community. I want to share a vision of community with you this morning because, like thirst for a drink, a vision draws us towards a preferred reality. Having a vision creates a tension, like the tension of a stretched rubber band, because on one end you have your current reality, and then you have this vision of a preferred reality, and it's like this stretching tension between the two, and it pulls us towards the vision. Now, some people ask, why does it pull us toward the vision and not back towards our current reality? And the reason is that our current reality is always changing, always moving, always in flux, whereas a clear vision of where you want to go is solid. And if you stay focused on it, it helps to pull you out of the uncertain and the unsure towards that which is solid and sure, and that something you can focus on. So it's important to be clear about our vision. I want to talk about some people who had a vision. Henry Ford had a vision of building a motor car for the great multitudes. In his words, he wanted it so that every American could enjoy the blessing of hours of pleasure in God's open spaces. He said, when I'm through, everyone will have one, and the horse will have disappeared from our highways. Winston Churchill offered a vision. If we can stand up to Hitler, he said, all of Europe may be free. But if we fail, the whole world, including the United States, will sink into abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister by the light of perverted science. If we can brace ourselves for our duty, he went on, even if the British Empire lasts for another 1,000 years, men will say of us, this was their finest hour. John F. Kennedy had a vision that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. We choose to go to the moon, he said, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Because it will organize the best of our energies and our skills. It is a challenge that we are willing to accept, that we are unwilling to postpone, and one in which we intend to win. Martin Luther King Jr. had a vision, a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. That one day the nation would rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal, that the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners would sit down together at the table of brotherhood. And All Souls has a vision, that by the time our congregation reaches its 100th birthday in the year 2021, we see our church community being an embodiment and an expression of the world as we hope it will one day become outside of these walls. We want to be the change that we hope to see. We can't change everything in the world, but we can change what happens right here, and we can create a model and an example of what's possible when people come together and work together and share their lives in love and service. It is a vision rooted in the democratic values of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, grounded in the philosophical values of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and uplifted by the ministry of Dr. John Burton Wolfe, our minister emeritus, who came to a city that still had white-only signs in the restaurant windows just 3 or 4 blocks from this church in 1960. A city filled with preachers who were obsessed with what they described as a narrow path to God and a wide-open precipice to hell. Ours is a vision of a community overflowing with a diversity of theologies, philosophies, ethnicities, and people of every culture, color, and class. People of varying abilities, representing every generation, sexual orientation, and political persuasion. Now, Christians might call such a place an example of the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven right here on earth. Skeptics would call it an impossible dream. We call it All Souls. And we are already well on our way to becoming such a community. We have church services that meet a spectrum of different beliefs and people in this community. We have our traditional service every Sunday at 10, which is structured a lot like most mainline Protestant services. If you came in there and plugged your ears and just watched what was going on, you'd think you're in any mainline church in the city. But it draws from a spectrum of sacred and secular readings and music. We have a contemporary service, the one we're in right now, which looks and feels a lot more like a high-energy, God-centered service that it's often found in non-denominational churches or charismatic and Pentecostal churches. But this service also blends sacred and secular readings and music, but draws firmly on our heritage of Christ consciousness, Christianity, and the Scriptures. And beginning again next Sunday, we will launch a service that we started 2 years ago called The Point, which is a what? That'll build attendance. Hey, that'll get people out there. All right. All right, dress nicely for that service. For our secularly inspired service. But no doubt filled with sexy people. But that service also attracts people who are looking for an inspiring message and a welcoming community, but who are not looking for religious ceremony or religious scriptures or religious music. Each one of these services is engaging, thought-provoking, and filled with great people and great music. And the beautiful thing is that it doesn't matter which service someone prefers. We are all united in our vision of what kind of community and what kind of world we want to create with our lives. Our worship time is barely 1 hour a week, although this is going to run just a little long today. Not too long. Throughout the rest of our time, though, outside of worship, we get to work together on projects and in committees. We get to serve together in our schools, in our care teams, on our house building ministries, feeding the homeless, taking a class together in meditation or yoga or the fantastic Bible class. I hope a lot of you are taking Reverend Davis's Bible class at 10 o'clock, because a lot of people have never really had anybody who's led them through and taught them about the Bible in a way that truly is grounded both in history, archaeology, and spirituality. Coming from his Baptist background and for a long time serving Unitarian Universalist churches, he has not only studied and served in churches in Africa and other places, but Gerald brings something to the study of the Bible that many people have never experienced. And if you haven't taken his class at 10 o'clock, he's also co-teaching it with Chris Van Landingham, who's an incredible Bible scholar here in Oklahoma. You need to check that out at 10 o'clock. But it's in these classes, and it's in these outreach efforts, and it's in our parties and events when we play together, like our lunch today following this service, like our auction next month, which is going to be phenomenal and a great time. It's all these things that knits our community together as one outside of Sunday morning. And it's all these ways that we interact and get to know and share our lives with one another. Where else do you see atheists and Christians, Buddhists and Jews, scientists and secularists side by side, with spiritual seekers and spiritual skeptics of all kinds working together towards a common goal and a common good? Where else? Because if you show me, I'll go there too, because I think it's fantastic. This spring we did a survey, and over 500 of you, or almost 500 of you, filled out the survey, which is a great sample of information about this church. So we learned a lot, and it's very reliable information. And we've learned that we have a great balance of generations, from the millennials to Gen Xers to boomers to the greatest generation here in this church. And we have people claiming many theological paths, and we have people of every income level. We have members of varying sexual orientations and gender identities and most political persuasions. And if we want to be with people who are just like us, there's lots of clubs out there and civic organizations that we can join, political parties for people who vote like us. But in church, this is a church which is different. In a religious community, we are seeking to live and to reflect our highest purpose and values and what we understand as the will of God, if you will, for our lives. In so many parts of our lives, we are separated from our fellow human beings by barriers of education or politics, income levels, or ethnicity, and other things. In this congregation, we have a vision of creating what some would call the kingdom of heaven here on earth. Let this be a place where everyone can belong if they have the heart for such a community. Now, regarding racial diversity, the survey shows us that we have a little over 7% of our membership who define themselves as people of color, biracial, or multiracial. Now, obviously we have work to do in this area, but it's pretty amazing when you think of as recently as 2008, we had less than 1%. So it's growing. And believe it or not, even with that amount of growth, it puts us on the road to being in a very small category of 5% of American churches across all denominations that have achieved such a level of racial and ethnic diversity. 11 o'clock Sunday morning still is the most segregated hour in America. And a recent survey that was reported in the Atlantic Monthly Journal shows that 75% of white people, or white-identified people in the United States, have zero social contact with anyone who's African American. Zero. They might see someone at work, but they have no social contact. And 65% of African Americans in this country have zero social contact with any white folks in this country. And that cannot be good. And that helps to explain why, when things happen like Ferguson recently, we see this incredible divide of perspectives on issues of race. So we need to break down these barriers, and creating real, intentional, multicultural community is about more than a vision of beauty. It is a fundamental strategy for the healing of America. And a fundamental strategy for the healing of our own souls. This fall, we're launching our first Spanish language Sunday Circle conversation group, which was born out of a group of Spanish speakers who found each other during coffee hour last year. And our Spanish-speaking population is among our fastest growing right now at All Souls. And I give a lot of credit for that to Reverend Barbara Prose over here, whose leadership in social justice has been tremendous. Our ministries to the homeless, the hungry, in the prisons, on immigration and the environment have quadrupled with her support since she took over, and her encouragement. And also, Reverend Barbara Prose has expanded our caring ministries exponentially since she's come here. Our pastoral care team, our Helping Souls, Friendly Souls, Parish Nurses, and Spirit Song, which is a choir that sings souls out of this life during their final moments on earth, and consoles those who remain. I'm reminded of Emily Wood, whose husband, Phil Wood, the former city auditor who died just this year. They've been members of All Souls since the 1970s, and I asked her if I could share this really meaningful story with you this morning. When I visited her and Phil in the hospital just before he died, Emily said, all of the years that they had been coming to All Souls, it was primarily because of our social justice work that the church does. I never knew, she said, that the church had such a strong and caring pastoral ministry. When the Spirit Song Choir came to sing for Phil at St. John's Hospital, all the nurses on the floor and a lot of the patients and their families all gathered outside of the room. There was not a dry eye to be found. And Emily said that was the moment when she heard the music rising all around her, that she felt transported and felt her body relax for the first time. She'd been sleeping in the hospital for weeks by his side. They'd been together, I think, married almost 80 years. She finally accepted, she said, right then, I finally accepted and started to let go and feel that I could survive his death. She couldn't even remember the world without him. She said she felt her whole body just relaxing as she discovered a peace of mind that had eluded her. And she still cries when she talks about it, as she did at the 10 o'clock service this morning. This is one of the many powerful ministries that Barbara has brought to us and that she makes happen every week in this church. Now, a lot of people have been asking me about our plans to move back into downtown in time to celebrate our centennial in 2021. Now, if you don't know, our city was gifted 2 city blocks in downtown, and our church voted a couple of years ago overwhelmingly to accept the land and to relocate down there once we have raised the funds in order to allow our church to do that, and a church that will meet the needs of this growing and diverse congregation. Now, after the vote of the congregation, we talked a lot about what the needs are in 2011 and 2012. Our master planning committee, who are responsible for designing the building, decided to slow down their work at that point and let a capital campaign team of leaders hold some exploratory conversations with some of the people in this church who could really either make or break this campaign depending on their belief in the vision. Because it's pretty hard to design a church if you don't know how much money you have to design it. Our architects told us that they could draw more in one morning than we could pay for in our lifetimes. So this team has been having these exploratory conversations this spring and this summer, and I sat in on those conversations, and I have to tell you how encouraging and positive it has been. The kinds of money that people are talking about giving are at a factor that is beyond anything this church has ever received or even ever thought about. It tells us that the desire and the commitment to help all souls succeed in achieving our vision in a new, larger space as part of the downtown Tulsa Renaissance is very high. The bottom line of all of this is that our vision is not about trying to put the horse out of business or off the highways, or about putting a man in a car or every man in a car or one man on the moon. And fortunately, we're not threatened by war in the way we were or at the scale of the 1940s or a cultural divide like the 1960s. Yet what we are challenging ourselves to do is something that's never been done before in human history. We are not setting out to do this because it's easy. We're setting out to do this because it's hard. And we're doing it because we know that it will gather our energies and organize our efforts for the good. 14,000 plus years of human civilization, and there has never been a religious community this diverse. When you think about the different faiths, from atheists and agnostics all the way through deep God-loving Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and others, all dwelling together in this church. And then you add on top of that the different, first of all, you can't find any church that has this spectrum, even in the Unitarian Universalist world. Then you put on top of that the issues of sexual orientation, and people have been kicked out of just about every church in town over that issue. So you put that in there, then you bring together race, ethnicity, and some of the other differences, gender identity, and some of the other things that we're bringing together in this place, and you realize it has never, ever happened before that a group of human beings have brought themselves and their lives together in a covenant of love and service with their neighbors who think, love, look, and live in so many different ways. And we've come to realize that we're doing this because we believe the work of building a truly intercultural community is the transformation of society. And in religious language, we'd say, is nothing short of the salvation of humankind and of our own souls. And that's why people from all over the country and from other countries have started listening to our services online and have even started to donate and send letters of encouragement to us. If we achieve this vision, and the church goes on to live another 1,000 years, the members will look back at this decade and what we have accomplished and say, this was truly one of their finest hours. If you're thirsty for a truly intercultural, interfaith, intergenerational community, and you believe that this city and this world is thirsty for it too, then I ask you to help us to be and become such a community. And let others out there know what we're doing who have a heart for it. Some people say that there's nothing new under the sun. I say, look around, my friends, because something new and very hopeful is happening right here, right now, with you and me. God bless you. I love you. Amen. Thank you.